The primary enforcement mechanism would be the obligation to publish standards and compliance with those standards. These precise publishing obligations would be established in the regulations, and failure to publish in accordance with the requirements could lead to the application of monetary penalties. It seems, Mr. Speaker, with the change in speakers, unfortunately my time is up. That may bring some applause from the opposition, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
I thank the honourable member. Déclaration de député, statements by members. L'honorable député de Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, last Sunday, Richmond Hill Hindu residents gathered at the 43rd annual Diwali Gala and fundraiser at Canadian Museum of Indian Civilization located within the Vishnu Mandir headed by Dr. Dubey. It was an evening dedicated to celebrating the magnificence of Diwali and supporting a heartfelt cause, raising funds for yet another dialysis clinic in Guyana and a beacon of hope for many. We also celebrated another milestone, the establishment of Dubey Medical Research Center in Guyana and in Canada. On Monday, a memorandum of understanding was signed with the University of McMaster to form the research education institution of this joint venture. Diwali, a glorious festival of light, a time when millions around the world illuminate their homes and hearts, symbolizing the triumph of light over darkness, knowledge over ignorance. In these times, when the world grapples with numerous conflicts, the essence of Diwali resonates more profoundly. In this spirit of enlightenment, we also observe Hindu Heritage Month, acknowledging the rich traditions and contribution of Hindu community to our diverse Canadian tapestry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kenora.
On November 10th, after 8 years, the Beaver Brae Broncos were back playing in the finals of the Winnipeg High School Football League, Mr. Speaker. The Broncos had an undefeated regular season to claim the AAA division regular season title and faced off against a familiar rival, the Fort Francis Muskies at IG Field in Winnipeg. And although it was the Muskies who gained the final victory, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the Broncos on an incredible 8-1 season record. I want to thank the dedicated coaches, especially head coach Chris Penner and his father Ferg, who have been the pillar of football in Kenora for decades. And as well, thank you to the parents, guardians, school staff, and all who support this great program year after year. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have to say thank you to the players who played with intensity, great work ethic, worked hard for one another, but also played with class and showed great respect for their opponents throughout the year. You've made us all incredibly proud. Go Broncos!
Congratulations to the Broncos. The honourable member from Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This year marks the 90th year since the Great Famine of 1932 to 1944 in Ukraine, the Holodomor. It was recognized by the Government of Canada as a genocide of the Ukrainian people, in which millions died of starvation and murder. Today is also an opportunity to honor the resilience and the strength of the Ukrainian people. As the world reflects on this painful historical event, Moscow is perpetrating its blockade of Ukraine's grain exports, have sparked grain and fertilizer shortages, and put millions of people at risk of hunger. This date is an alarming reminder of how easily we take some things for granted. Let us take a moment to commemorate the many victims, and let us appreciate the bread on our tables and the initiatives that are still giving access to food to those in need during these challenging times around the world. Thank you very much.
L'honorable député d'Abitibi.
The honourable member for Abitibi, James Bay, Nunavik, AU. Mr. Speaker, it's with great sadness we learned of the passing of an important local man, Charlie Washapabano, member of the HoC Abitibi-Temiskaming Board of Directors and Program Coordinator for AU Itchy Sports and Recreation, a former player with the Comets Midget AA and the Forestier Midget AAA in Amos in the late 90s. Charlie went on to play hockey college in New Hampshire. After his career as a player, he played a central role in the development of hockey in James Bay, notably as a trainer and coach of several minor hockey teams. In 2022, for the team's player development camp, the Montreal Canadiens called on his services as a guest coach. This charismatic figure of the Cree Nation left us far too young. I offer my condolences to his family, friends, and the Cree communities. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I had the honour of being at Queen's Park for the installation of Edith Dumont as Ontario's 30th and first Franco-Ontarian Lieutenant Governor. Edith Dumont is a respected educator and administrator who has dedicated her life to education, leadership, and community service. Driven by a desire to build relationships, strengthen communities, create cooperative teams, and push for inclusion, diversity, and the vitality of La Francophonie, her career has taken her all across Canada and around the world to places like France, Morocco, Romania, Rwanda, and South Africa. A proud Franco-Ontarian, she has devoted the past 3 decades to supporting Ontario's Francophone communities and advocating accessible, inclusive, quality French language education, among other things, as head of the Eastern Ontario French Language Public School Board and as Vice President of the University of French Ontario. We thank her for her dedication in her new role. Thank you.
Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, farmers from across the country in Ottawa for a rally outside the Senate. Why are they out there today when they should be finishing their corn harvest? They're asking a few Liberal-appointed senators to stop playing games and put my bill, C-234, to a vote. A bill that will axe the carbon tax off propane and natural gas to dry your crops and heat your livestock barns on farm. Axing the carbon tax will save Canadian farmers $1 billion over the next 10 years. Farmers feed cities, and they help feed the world.
That's right.
At a time when this high-priced, high-inflation Liberal government should be helping farmers, they instead tell them to install a heat pump in your hog barn.
Unbelievable.
How out of touch can you be? Whether you're trying to raise a family, enjoy retirement, or making an honest living as a farmer, Canadians know one thing. After 8 long years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost.
That's right.
Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Aurora Oak Ridges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, I joined our community in Coming Together for Peace, a gathering hosted by Karen Dale of the Richmond Hill United Church. I would like to thank Doug Lowith and Marge Andre for organizing this evening. I'd also like to thank Sarah Loretta Schuster of the Turtle Clan for the smudging and traditional hand drumming, pianist Barry Peters and violinist Nadine Bargou for the soulful music, and all the speakers and volunteers who rounded out the evening. In candlelight, we came together to contemplate our common humanity through music, readings, and times of silence. We gathered in response to the divisiveness and intense emotions in our community surrounding the war raging between Israel and Hamas. This beautiful evening brought together people of many faiths to focus on peace and have conversation to heal the divisions. Change in a country begins with one person. We each have the power within ourselves to bring about massive change through immense love and peace within. Thank you.
The
Honourable Member for Nickelbelt. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to highlight a major step forward for Francophone Saskatchewan. Last Saturday, November 18th, the Nation Fransaskoise inaugurated its bookstore in Saskatoon. The opening was attended by many Saskatchewan Francophones, also known as Fransaskois, who were delighted to have a new French-language bookstore. It's the only one in the entire province. In addition to being a bookstore, it offers a whole range of products promoting Fransaskois culture. The store's goals are to promote Fransaskois heritage and to foster a sense of belonging. We need to grow the sense of belonging to this community, and I'd like to salute the Nation Fransaskoise and the whole community on the opening of their new bookstore, and I wish the owners and all Fransaskois every success. Our identity is our proud French language, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Today Today, we stand with Ukraine as they mark the Day of Dignity and Freedom, commemorating the Orange Revolution of 2004 and the Revolution of Dignity of 2013. 10 years ago today, we saw the beginning of a new era for Ukraine. Young students craving change took to the streets of Maidan to stand up for their aspirations of Euro integration and to reject lawlessness. They stood for justice, truth, and freedom, and our shared values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The world witnessed their strength and resilience. What started as the barricades on the Maidan was shortly transformed into the trenches of Donbass, and for the past 636 days, we've watched their heroic resistance against Russia's illegal invasion. What started as the defense of liberty and democracy has evolved into safeguarding Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Opposition to domestic tyrants like Viktor Yanukovych shifted to armed resistance against the barbaric raiders and terrorists by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Every day, Ukrainians unite for democracy, peace, and prosperity, not only for their homeland, but for all Western democracy. Slava Ukraini!
The honourable member from Scarborough Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 1 in 4 children around the world is impacted by conflict and disaster, more likely to be displaced or living in a refugee camp. November 20th is World Children's Day, an opportunity to recommit our support for the fundamental rights of all children, including access to education, health and nutrition, and safety from violence. Earlier this month, youth leaders from across the country were in Ottawa to advocate for the health, protection, and security of children worldwide. They shared their experiences at a parliamentary reception I co-hosted with Results Canada, a national organization enabling everyday people to help put an end to extreme poverty. With over 500 million children facing crisis situations globally, it is critical to engage next-generation leaders to tackle the challenges of today. As we confront the realities of rising global conflict, let us raise our collective voice and champion children in emergencies. Merci.
Hold on. The honourable member from Calgary Centre.
Speaker, for years now, this Minister of Finance has brought forth statements, not what will be done for Canadians, but how she can throw money around to address the latest crisis. Let's go through them. An environment crisis, a cost of living crisis, a housing affordability crisis, a national unity crisis, an addiction crisis compounded by a homelessness crisis, a food bank crisis, and a spiraling debt crisis. These crises are caused by the NDP Liberal government. As a rule doctors follow, the first step when taking action is do no harm. This government's actions over the past 8 years are killing the Canadian economy. Canada needs a new approach, one that puts results ahead of empty words and the splashing around of other people's money. It's obvious this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Let's start with balancing our budgets and focusing on building homes, jobs, and futures for Canadians. Common sense Conservatives will deliver powerful paychecks, not empty words.
The honourable member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of the most expensive government in our history, it is Canadians who are suffering the real-world consequences. There are now a record number of Canadians that are using food banks. Housing costs have doubled, and Canadians are reportedly cutting back on basic necessities just to afford their energy bills. The cost of living is spiraling out of control here in Canada, and it is this NDP Liberal coalition that is responsible.
That's right.
They continue to hike taxes and add fuel to the inflationary fire, driving up interest rates. The only way to undo this damage that they have done is to reverse course in today's fall economic statement. Conservatives, we've provided a plan. Cancel the planned quadrupling of the carbon tax, announce a plan to balance the budget, and deliver a plan to build homes, not bureaucracy. Right. Canadians are desperate for common sense, Mr. Speaker. Let's bring home lower prices.
Bring it home here. L'honorable député Gatineau.
The honourable member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to welcome municipal officials from across the country. To welcome them here to the Greater National Capital Region. They're here to represent their local communities at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Parliament Hill Days.
National voice of municipal governments with over 2,100 municipalities of all sizes, from urban to rural, and representing more than 92% of all Canadians.
Cooperation between municipalities and the federal government is essential if the realities of all Canadians are to be heard and considered. That's why I'd like to thank the mayors, reeves, councillors, municipal directors, staff, and the FCM for attending. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is in Ottawa this week to discuss the essential work its members do in over 2,000 communities. And 16 of those communities are in my riding: Fruitvale, Montrose, Trail, Warfield, Roslyn, Castlegar, Slocan, Silverton, New Denver, Nakusp, Grand Forks, Greenwood, Midway, Vesuvius, Oliver, and Penticton, and the regional districts of Okanagan, Smilkameen, Kootenay Boundary, and Central Kootenay. Hear, hear. And I want to single out Leah Main, a councillor from Silverton. Leah is a champion of rural issues on the FCM executive. Municipalities are at the pointy end of the stick on some of the toughest issues: housing, climate adaptation, public safety, mental health, and more. But small towns lack the funds to tackle these massive problems, and many even lack the HR capacity to apply for existing funding programs. We need to fix this with more direct allocation of funds so that communities across Canada can do the work that we depend on them to do. Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, we are currently marking Prostate Cancer Awareness Month with the Bovember campaign. But this year, Quebecers have an extra incentive because it was prostate cancer that took the life of singer Carl Tremblay, the lead singer of the Cowboy Fringants. He wasn't even in his 50s yet. Growing a mustache or wearing a bow tie for the Pro-Cure campaign is great since it helps spread information and support medical research. But there's something even more decisive that can be done in the fight against prostate cancer, and that is to take the prostate test yourself. So, Mr. Speaker, to you and my colleagues, both in government and opposition, I extend this friendly invitation, which under other circumstances might be considered unparliamentary. Guys, go and get your prostate checked.
Then I have the honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
8 years of this NDP Liberal government has given Canada the worst economic growth since the Great Depression. The OECD predicts that GDP per capita growth will be a paltry 0.7% per annum over the next 10 years, putting us dead last amongst advanced economies. We are facing declines in investment, innovation, and productivity. This Prime Minister, well, Mr. Speaker, he's just not worth the cost. Mr. Speaker, this country is quickly approaching a fork in the road. Canadians can choose between the last 8 years of record food bank usage, crime and chaos in our cities, Canadians losing their houses because of high inflation and high interest rates, or a conservative plan that will empower Canadians to pursue their dreams, unfettered by burdensome regulation, punitive tax rates, and corrosive inflation. It's time for a new direction. It's time that Canadians started winning!
The honourable member from Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the famine genocide in Ukraine known as the Holodomor, when Joseph Stalin closed Ukraine's borders and confiscated all food to destroy a Ukrainian population opposed to his rule. 19 people per minute, 1,200 per hour, and 28,000 per day were dying of famine at the height of the Holodomor. The world was silent. Millions died as a result. My grandmother, Olena, was a survivor of the Holodomor, and she once told me that she hoped that the victims of the Holodomor would not only be remembered, but that they would be honored. Honoring them for her meant not just remembering them or commemorating them, but taking the steps to ensure that a crime like this never happens again. Right now, in Russian-occupied Ukraine, it is happening again. Russia is killing, torturing, and raping civilians. Russia is deporting Ukrainian children to Russia. Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine again. The only way to stop this is for Canada and our allies to give the Ukraine the support it needs to ensure it recaptures all of its territory, to ensure it achieves a decisive victory. Let us do as my grandmother would have asked if she were here today. Let us remember the victims. Let us commemorate the victims. Let us honor them.
There has been a request for unanimous consent from members to allow a member to make her declaration again because another member had walked in front of her at that time. Does this member have unanimous consent to? Thank you. L'honorable député de, je m'excuse, Bay James EU.
The honourable member for Abitibi James Bay. Mr. Speaker, it was with great sadness that we learned of the passing of an important local man, Charlie Washa Pabino, member of the HoC Abitibi-Temiskaming Board of Directors and Program Coordinator for AUHC Sports and Recreation. A former player with the Midget AA Comets and the Forestier Midget AAA in Amos in the late 90s, Charlie went on to play college hockey in New Hampshire. After his career as a player, he played a central role in the development of hockey in the James Bay area, including as a trainer and coach of several minor hockey teams. In 2022, for the team's development camp, the Montreal Canadiens called on his services as a guest coach. This charismatic figure of the Cree Nation has left us far too young. I offer my condolences to his family, friends, and the Cree communities. I'd like to thank all members for allowing our colleague to do that.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, we know that he's just not worth the cost. Now we have a Scotiabank report stating that government deficit spending, which is mainly the federal government, has increased interest rates by 2%. That's $700 a month for the average mortgage. That's $8,400 a year for the average family, just in additional interest rates, because of deficits mainly caused by this Prime Minister. Will he present a plan today to balance the budget and reduce interest rates so Canadians can keep their homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know what the Conservative Party's approach is: austerity and cuts. We, on the other hand, are investing in housing. We are investing to ensure that Canadians find life more affordable. We know that this is a difficult period for Canadians, but the solution is not austerity and cuts. It is strategic investments to support families, to create the jobs of tomorrow, and to build hundreds of thousands of new housing units in the years to come.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
Austerity and cuts are exactly what Canadian families are living today. 7 million of them are cutting meals because they can't afford food prices after he's inflated them. And many are cutting homes and forced to live in tents because mortgage rates have risen so fast under this Prime Minister's deficit. Scotiabank now calculates government deficits are adding 2 full percentage points to the rates. That's $700 per month in higher mortgage payments. Next year, $900 billion, the next 3 years, $900 billion of new mortgages, or 2/3 will come up for renewal. We risk a massive default crisis. Will the Prime Minister announce a plan to balance the budget to bring down mortgage rates so Canadians can keep their homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen this movie before. The Conservative politician's approach to facing challenges is always cuts and austerity. He recognizes, like we all do, that Canadians are facing difficult times, and his solution is for the federal government to do less, to invest less in Canadians, to be there less to support Canadians. That is not what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. Over the past number of months, we've announced the construction of over 100,000, 200,000 homes homes across the country. We're delivering support for people in buying groceries with greater competition, and we're moving forward with clean jobs into the future, whether it's manufacturing with Stellantis or Volkswagen, whether it's resources. We're moving forward to support workers.
Hear, hear.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
What we're proposing is for the government, the federal government, to do less damage and cost less money so that Canadians don't have to live in austerity and cuts like they are today. Today we found out that rent rose faster in October than in any month in 40 years. The Prime Minister's solution to that? Quadruple the carbon tax. Quadruple the carbon tax? Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister announce in an hour in his fall economic statement that he's gotten a little bit of common sense, that he's going to cancel the quadrupling and cap the tax until the carbon tax election, when I will win and axe the tax all?
Mr. Speaker, our solution to Canadians who are having trouble affording housing is to build more housing, is to invest in working with municipalities to unlock more homes built, to bring down rents. These are the investments we're making. But, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the Leader of the Opposition talks about the damage we're doing to Canada by delivering $10 a day childcare, the damage we're doing to Canada by delivering dental care to kids who can't afford it, the damage we're doing to Canada by continuing to step up for seniors by protecting their pensions. If that's damage, then we really see what the Conservative leader is made of.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is forcing Canadians to give $15 billion to one battery plant that we now learn is going to employ 1,600 foreign workers with Canadian tax dollars. Now, $15 billion works out to $1,000 in federal taxes for every single family in Canada. You would think that he would read the contract he signed with this multinational company. And if he did, can he tell us the section in that contract that limits the number of foreign workers that get Canadian tax dollars?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is, even for having watched this Leader of the Opposition in his almost 20-year political career, it is still astonishing to see the way he will choose to use any misinformation to score political points. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, he opposes the investments in manufacturing in Canada. He opposes the Stellantis deal to create EV batteries. He opposes the Volkswagen deal that's going to create up to 30,000 direct and indirect jobs in St. Thomas. He continues to stand against a plan to grow great jobs into a net zero future, and he'll use any fake excuse to try and advance that cause.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister has spread nothing but disinformation on these very projects. He was billions of dollars in underestimating the original cost before the shovels were even in the ground. He claimed the thing would pay itself back in 5 years. Now we know it's 20. And now we've learned that the majority of the jobs are going to go to foreign workers. That's right. Struggling single moms and seniors will pay $1,000 in taxes, mostly to pay the wages of foreign workers who will not even keep the money here. Why does he so thoroughly disdain and disrespect Canadian workers that he wants to send their money to another country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that is flat out false, and it is a kind of fear-mongering from the Leader of the Opposition Canadians are seeing almost every single day. Mr. Speaker, these are thousands of good jobs for Canadians because this government has stepped up to reinvest in manufacturing. After decades, after years of neglect under a Conservative government, we are stepping up to deliver for Canadians. We are delivering a strong future into a net zero world, and this Leader of the Opposition is wanting to take us back to the Stone Age.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, Quebec and Canada are facing major economic issues, and that's doubtless why we're having an economic update. But before going to speak to Quebec seniors or Quebec Chambers of Commerce, will the Prime Minister confirm today that the economic update will explicitly include an increase in old age security and an extension in the period for reimbursing COVID loans to small businesses? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for 8 years we have been there for seniors with investments to increase their pension, to help the most vulnerable seniors, with programs that have delivered help and support for seniors in their communities. We've invested in housing for seniors. We will keep being there for seniors. And during COVID, we were there to support small business, to help entrepreneurs. We will continue to be there, and I'm looking forward to sharing the content of the fall economic update with my colleague, but he will still have to wait a few hours. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, sometimes I wonder if I should send the Prime Minister my questions in advance, because then maybe the answer would have something to do with my question. So if I'm understanding what he's saying, there won't be more money for seniors, and that there won't be anything for the tens of thousands of businesses which may have to close due to the consequences of the pandemic. Perhaps the government is afraid that it won't have enough money. But then I have an idea. Why not just cut subsidies to oil companies so that it can support seniors and businesses? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'll be very happy to send a schedule to the leader of the Bloc Québécois to tell him that the economic update will be shared at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It will be shared with the House of Commons and Canadians. Then the Bloc Québécois can ask whatever they like about it. But I will say that help for seniors, Canadians, housing, cost of living assistance, investments in a more prosperous economy in a changing world, those are all things that will be in the update. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with my colleagues.
L'honorable député de Burnaby-Sud.
When the Prime Minister announced the Stellantis battery plant in Windsor, he said this would be good jobs for a generation of Canadians. Now we're learning that there's potentially a secret deal for 1,600 foreign workers. So when the Prime Minister made this announcement, was it just a photo announcement, or was it really a plan to create jobs for Canadians? And will the Prime Minister make this deal public so Canadians can find out whether he broke yet another promise?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know nobody in this House was surprised that the Leader of the official opposition fell prey to disinformation and choosing to attack the Stellantis deal. But it's disappointing to see the NDP leader anchored in the community of Windsor speaking out against this Stellantis deal based on nothing but rumors and disinformation. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is thousands upon thousands of good jobs for Canadians, good jobs that will grow the local economy, will contribute to our battery and manufacturing supply chain in Canada. This is a good deal for Canada. Everyone should get behind it, especially people who care about Windsor.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
If the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, then just make the deal public. Canadians will know.
Loblaws and Metro have just announced much higher profits than last year, at a time when 1 out of 10 Quebecers is having to go to food banks. This morning, we learned that grocery inflation has been higher than general inflation for the 23rd consecutive month. Will the Prime Minister announce the measures to increase competition that we've been asking for today? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have been concerned about grocery prices for some time. That is why both the Minister and the Parliamentary Committee have brought in the heads of the grocery chains and have spoken with them to stabilize grocery prices. We know that it's important that we be here to support Canadians with the cost of living, and I can assure my colleagues that in our fall economic statement that we will table shortly, there will be measures to further increase grocery competition to help people be able to make ends meet and support their families during this difficult time.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Last year, the finance minister promised to balance the budget in her false hopes update, then did a massive flip-flop and promised to balance the budget in the year never. The prime minister did a massive flip-flop recently too on his carbon tax scam, where he gave a temporary carve-out for Canadians in Atlantic Canada. That's 3% of Canadians, whereas poll numbers were tanking. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP government are not worth the cost, and they still plan on quadrupling it. Why don't they pause quadrupling the carbon tax in today's failing economic update and call a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague often neglects to mention a whole range of important facts. The price on pollution is an important component of a broad approach to fighting climate change. It is done in a manner that addresses affordability concerns. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back than they pay. With respect to home heating oil, it is a specific case. We are focused on ensuring we're doing it in a manner that will help us to drive the fight against climate change while ensuring affordability for Canadians. It is a responsible and thoughtful approach to public policy, something that we never hear from the Conservatives.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Canada's best climate change plan is going to be a change in government under the common sense Conservative leader as Prime Minister. 2 million Canadians going to a food bank in a single month. 1 in 5 are skipping meals. Food inflation out of control. Failed woke policies like the carbon tax are driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. While these Liberal NDP government continue to miss every single climate change target that they set for themselves, and Canadians get less in these phony rebates. And they still plan on quadrupling it. So why don't they put the pause on quadrupling the carbon tax and go to election so Canadians can decide on the carbon tax themselves?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think on this side, and actually for Canadians across this country, but particularly in Ontario, when we hear the words common sense and Conservatives, we get the shivers, because we remember the time when they cut services to education, when they cut services to healthcare, when they cut important services for water that led to deaths in Walkerton, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we hear common sense Conservatives, we know that means cuts for Canadians, harms to Canadians, and nothing good comes of it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, grocery and home heating bills continue to rise, as do rent and mortgage payments. Scotiabank has said that inflationary government deficits are to blame. If our deficit maker-in-chief was to show fiscal responsibility, it would drop interest rates by 2% and save the average family $700 a month off their mortgage. Does the Prime Minister understand that his deficits are making it difficult for people to afford basic necessities like food and housing? Or does he think that all Canadians are auditioning for Les Mis?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the member opposite and perhaps inform the House that this morning Statistics Canada indicated that inflation has dropped yet again in this country. It is now at 3.1%. Mr. Speaker, Canada continues to have the lowest deficit among all G7 countries. And with respect to the report that my honourable colleague cites, that report indicates that it is actually provincial spending, not federal, and COVID supports that are the result of the statistics that he's citing, Mr. Speaker. The facts are important.
The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, if we all quiet down, you can already hear the fiscal engines in the background starting to rev up, as the only solution for inflationary spending for this Prime Minister is more inflationary spending. The Conservative leader has challenged the Prime Minister to stop his carbon tax hikes, reduce his deficits, and build homes, not bureaucracy. Will they address these issues in their mini-budget today, or will they reject this common sense plan and show that the only thing that isn't subject to rising inflation in Canada is the competence of this NDP Liberal government?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister stated just a few moments ago, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance will be tabling the fall economic statement at 4 p.m. in this House. All members, including the member opposite, will have a chance to look at all of the numbers, and we will have a chance in this House to debate the economic plan that our government has put forward, Mr. Speaker. I would remind the member opposite, when he talks of deficit, that Canada continues to have the lowest deficit among all G7 countries, and we will continue to be fiscally responsible. Good job.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of inflationary Liberal spending, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost for Quebecers. Quebec's October inflation was still the worst in Canada at 4.2%. Scotiabank experts have calculated that government overspending has added 2% to interest rates in Canada. That's $700 a month more for mortgages. Will the Liberal Prime Minister announce a plan today to balance the budget in today's mini-budget so that interest rates can come down and Canadians and Quebecers can keep their homes? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier, the fall economic update will be tabled at 4 in a very short time, and then our honourable colleague will be able to look at the numbers. But I can confirm immediately that Canada will continue to have the lowest deficit in the G7, and we will continue to be fiscally responsible.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The honourable member. Well, according to the data we've seen, rent prices have risen by more than 9% in Quebec over the past year. In the Journal de Montréal, we read about a 30-year-old man who was preparing to spend his first winter on the street with nowhere to call home. After 8 years of inflationary Liberal spending, it's hard to understand why the Bloc Québécois wants 2 more years of this and also to radically increase the carbon tax. The Bloc Québécois wants the balance of power, not a balanced budget. Does the Prime Minister have the Bloc say so to continue irresponsibly spending billions of dollars? Or will he finally listen to Conservative common sense and balance the budget?
L'honorable ministre des Transports.
The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are telling us that they care about Canadians, but they don't seem to give a fig about what's happening. They don't seem to care about the flooding, the heavy rains, the wildfires everywhere. They don't seem to care at all. They want to cut money to fight climate change. They want to make us back up and keep backing up with cuts and austerity, but we will not be dragged back into the Stone Age. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, Radio-Canada's revelation that Mexican drug cartels are trafficking people across Canada's border is very serious. The federal government cannot allow criminal groups to exploit migrants, and that's not all. The RCMP has confirmed that the crossings used by the cartels for human trafficking are the very same ones that are used for weapons and drug trafficking. Needless to say, the federal government cannot allow Mexican cartels to set up shop here. When will the government regain control of the border? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague. We cannot accept cartels taking control of the border, but we should also avoid exaggerating in the question. Mr. Speaker, our government is concerned about what Radio-Canada reported, and that's exactly why we will be working more closely with our law enforcement services, with border services, and, very importantly, with our American partners in order to fight exactly what my colleague is talking about. I believe in the hard work of border services and the RCMP. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, it's not my question that was exaggerated. It's the negligence of this government. Cartels don't just facilitate crime at the border, they are directly involved in crime in Quebec. Radio-Canada has revealed that South Americans who entered the country with fake Mexican passports have organized a network of burglaries in Quebec. To quote the Montreal police, they come to the country for the sole purpose of robbing people. Mr. Speaker, the Montreal police have even said that Quebec is an easy target because of these loopholes at the border. So my question is simple. What is the federal government doing to regain control of the border? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to fight organized crime. We will do so on many fronts simultaneously. We have invested $400 million more in our law enforcement agencies, the border services, the RCMP, to give them the tools they need to work with their Quebec and U.S. partners in order to fight the arrival of organized crime. My colleague knows very well that I spoke about it with Minister Bonnardel in Quebec. We will continue to work with Quebec and our U.S. partners because we take this threat very seriously. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the federal government cannot keep letting the cartels exploit migrants. It can't allow them to spread misinformation on social networks in order to extract thousands of dollars from these disadvantaged people. It can't let them place people at risk of imprisonment in Canada or in the U.S. As we speak, vulnerable people are making their way to Canada on the basis of lies, and they're getting robbed and arrested. When will the government finally put an end to this exploitation? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we completely share these concerns about the exploitation of migrants. The Prime Minister raised matters of irregular migration with the President of Mexico. My colleague, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, has also discussed these matters with her counterparts in the U.S. and Mexico. And I myself had that discussion with my American counterparts in order to ensure that all possible measures will be taken in order to prevent exactly what my colleague just spoke about.
The Honourable Member from Lethbridge.
The Prime Minister promised to make housing more affordable for Canadians, but we know that wasn't totally true. After 8 years of this Liberal government, rent has doubled, housing prices have skyrocketed, in fact, they've doubled as well, and mortgage payments, of course, have gone through the roof. In fact, today Scotiabank confirmed that mortgage rates have increased by 2% just due to this government's overspending. No other factors considered, just this government's overspending. Mortgage rates have gone up by 2%, which means on average $700 a month extra on a family's mortgage. When will this government do the responsible thing, rein in their spending, so that Canadians can afford to put a roof over their head?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, in order to address the national housing crisis, we're making the investments necessary to get Canada building again. And I have good news for my colleague. It is working. When we look at the Statistics Canada report from yesterday, we see significant increases in the investments in residential construction. In fact, the heading of the section from the report is entitled Strong Gains in Residential Investment, indicating a nearly 8% increase just this past month. We have a plan to continue to cut costs for home builders and to make the investments necessary to get the homes built that the economy and that families who live in it need.
The Honourable Member from Lethbridge.
I'm not sure what Liberal report the Honourable Member is reading from, but the stat is this. Actually, fewer homes are being built, and investment in the market is down by 14% for new construction. So that's the fact. And out of that, then, rent is doubling for Canadians, mortgages are skyrocketing, and housing prices have also doubled. Canadians can't afford to house themselves. In fact, their mortgage rates are up on average by $700 a month, and that is only due to this government's overspending. Just due to their overspending alone, $700 a month. No other factors considered, just their overspending. When will they rein it in, do the responsible thing, and allow Canadians to afford a roof over their head?
The The Honourable Minister for Housing Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to my honourable colleague, she just does not have her numbers right. She is entitled to her own opinion, but certainly not to her own facts. I will tell you specifically what the Stats Canada, which is not some Liberal organization, it operates independently. They indicated this month investment in residential building went up 7.3%. Single-family home investment increased 6.4%. Multi-unit construction rose 8.2%. Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives are concerned about the housing crisis, why are they committing to cut funding for home building and to raise taxes on home builders?
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, rent has doubled, house prices have doubled, and mortgage payments are up 150%. Just now, Statistics Canada shows that investment in housing construction is down 14%. Turns out that photo ops with the housing minister and hard hats don't actually build homes. Who knew? Will the government end their photo ops so Canadians can get houses built?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I find it fascinating when there are accusations about using photo ops for political gain, when the leader of the Conservative Party, when he was a minister, actually violated election rules for a photo op where he showed up wearing a Conservative Party logo on behalf of the government of Canada. Mr. Speaker, with respect to my honourable colleague, he has the facts wrong. Stats Canada is indicated that we are actually seeing an increase in housing investments when it comes to the residential sector. Housing starts are up. In fact, we are on pace to build more than 50,000 additional homes over and above the record that the Conservatives achieved while they were in government.
Absolutely. The Honourable Member from Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, you know what, Mr. Speaker? When the Conservative leader was Minister of Housing, a typical family home cost only $450,000. Investment in housing construction is down 14% under this minister. Rent has doubled, house prices have doubled, and mortgage payments are up 150%. Again, will the government end their photo op so Canadians can get houses built?
While the member from Edmonton Riverbend was asking his question, it was difficult for the Speaker to hear because of a conversation I was having at the far end of the House. I'm going to ask all members, please, to keep your voices down, to take your microphone when the Speaker recognizes you, to either ask or to answer a question. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the Conservatives like to make up facts, but I didn't realize that they were trying to make a new way of doing math. When Statistics Canada says that housing starts are up 7%, that does not equal a decrease of 14%. I would encourage the members opposite to look at the Stats Canada report, but we understand that they don't have a lot of respect for Stats Can because it was them when they were in government that cut the long-form census because they don't like to make policy based on data because then they can actually realize that they're making bad policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's public service workers stepped up during the pandemic and every day since to deliver the critical services Canadians rely on. How does this government thank them? With a disastrous rollout to a new healthcare plan. Workers are paying thousands of dollars out of pocket for their medication, healthcare, and wait months to be reimbursed, forcing families to make impossible decisions. The Liberals' lack of urgency to act just shows how out of touch they are. When will the government stop delaying and fix this mess so workers can have the benefits they earned?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's public servants and their families deserve to have access to their benefits as quickly as possible. I have been in close touch with the supplier and have ensured that the supplier will agree to bringing down call wait times to between 5 to 10 minutes by December 31st, opening call centres on weekends, as well as introducing escalation processes for those who aren't served well. Mr. Speaker, we will always make sure that Canada's public servants are reimbursed for their benefits. We are grateful for their service every single day. Thank you.
The The honourable member from Timmins, James Bay.
So we're getting the fall economic update from the government today. Well, let me give an update from small businesses in Northern Ontario. I mean, first they got hammered by the pandemic, then they got hammered by high inflation. Now they're being hammered by Liberal indifference. And if the Prime Minister doesn't change course on the CEBA repayments, many of our businesses are going to be forced to close their doors in January. So will the Prime Minister do the right thing and extend the loan repayment deadline so that we can have our small businesses get back on their feet?
Excellent.
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, we know times are tough and still tough for small businesses. If they are unable to repay by January 18, they still have a full 3 years to repay their CEBA loan. We extended the term loan repayment deadline to make sure that small businesses are able to focus on navigating pandemic recovery. We are also cutting taxes for growing small businesses and lowering credit card fees by up to a quarter. We will always be there for small businesses, Mr. Speaker, and that will never change.
Here, here.
The honourable member from Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada Pension Plan is a key pillar in the federal government's commitment to support Canadians in their retirement. Residents in my province are worried about the attack it's facing. But even more alarming is the official opposition's continued silence on the issue. Can the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages tell us what our government is doing to protect Alberta pensions and ensure that the Canada Pension Plan we have all paid into is there for people in retirement?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Calgary Skyview for his question and his hard work. Albertans must speak up on this matter. As a federal government, Mr. Speaker, we will always protect the pensions of Albertans and to fight the reckless and risky proposal of Alberta Conservatives to pull Albertans out of the CPP. Every member in this House should be defending the CPP, but Mr. Speaker, what do we hear from Alberta Conservatives? Silence, zero, zilch, and their silence speaks volumes about their unwillingness to protect Albertans and their pensions. We will stick up for Albertans every day and for the Canada Pension Plan. They can do whatever they want. We got the backs of Canadians.
The honourable member from Kenora.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He's planning to quadruple the carbon tax on gas, groceries, and home heating, but our common sense plan is to axe the tax to bring home lower prices. Mr. Speaker, today the government has an opportunity. Will they include in today's mini budget a plan to finally stop their carbon tax hikes?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party pretends to offer certain principles, and if you don't like those, they have other principles. In their 2008 platform, and I quote, "We will work to develop and implement a North America-wide cap-and-trade system for greenhouse gases and air pollution." In their 2021 platform that they all ran on, they said, and I quote, "We recognize that the most efficient way to reduce our emissions is a use of pricing mechanisms." My goodness, given the flip-flopping on that side of the House, how do Canadians believe anything these folks say?
Order. The honourable member from Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, the simple fact is that this government's plan just isn't working. They continue to miss climate target after climate target. They're only driving up the cost of living for Canadians. And in Northern Ontario, we cannot afford to pay more for gas and home heating. But the Liberal and NDP politicians across Northern Ontario continue to leave their residents out in the cold. So I will ask again, will we see in today's mini budget a plan from this government to finally cancel their carbon tax hikes?
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to correct a record
The Harper government didn't meet any of the environmental targets that they have. We are on track, 85% to meet our 2030 targets. We have 6 years left, Mr. Speaker, to get there, and we will meet the interim 2026 targets. We are meeting our targets when it comes to climate change, when it comes to protecting nature, when it comes to phasing out plastic pollution. Right. They don't believe in any of this, Mr. Speaker. They want to increase pollution in Canada, not on this side of the House. We're working for Canadians, for the health of Canadians, for the future of our kids and grandkids, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Bellechasse et les Etchemins-Lévis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Banque
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotiabank experts have calculated that the government overspending adds 2 percentage points to interest rates in Canada, and it's Canadians who are struggling to pay their mortgage rates that are paying the price. This government has never tabled a balanced budget. Will the government announce a plan to balance the budget today so that interest rates can come down and Canadians can stay in their homes? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, Conservatives who try to blame the federal government for inflation have a difficult task ahead of them. The report that my colleague is quoting says that COVID supports and government expenditures from provincial governments are responsible for these increases, not federal government expenditures. My colleague is a former member of the Quebec Legislative Assembly. Is she saying that we should demand that provinces spend less? Is that her conclusion?
L'honorable député de Bellechasse, les Etchemins-Lévis.
Avec respect, je la ramène à la...
With respect, I'll bring her back to reality. The economic situation is such that a young man from Sherbrooke has to spend winter in a tent because there's no access to affordable housing. The costly Liberal Bloc coalition wants to radically increase the carbon tax, which is going to raise the price of everything. It costs a lot to vote for the Bloc. We're asking the government to cancel carbon tax increases, balance the budget, build housing, and not bureaucracy. Will the Minister of Finance surprise us and balance the budget and give us some hope? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. What's disappointing for many people watching us is to see that the member who once defended carbon pricing, who stood up for fighting climate change, has flip-flopped and now is part of a party that no longer believes in climate change, doesn't believe in protecting the environment for our children and grandchildren. That's what Canadians find disappointing.
L'honorable député de Drummond.
Monsieur le Président, nos médias.
Mr. Speaker, our media are in crisis. Yesterday, the head of Quebecor said that TVA is being pushed to the limit. Bell Media's vice president said, the longer we wait, the more we put ourselves at risk and the more we expose ourselves to losing sources of information. Meanwhile, what did the minister say? We hope that by 2025, we'll have a new regulatory framework. 2025. Our media outlets are in danger now. 2 years from now is too late. What's the minister waiting for? The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage. As my colleague knows, since the media crisis started in Canada, the government has been there to set up tax credits, among other measures, programs which did not exist before. We will continue to do so. We've now provided all the tools to the CRTC required to adapt the regulatory framework to today's reality, especially to ensure that web giants pay their fair share and participate in the success of our Canadian businesses and creating Canadian content. We will continue to work in partnership with all representatives of the media industry. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Drummond.
Monsieur le Président, C11, C18, c'est des...
Mr. Speaker, C11 and C18 are good ideas, but they're not working. Until negotiations with web giants are concluded on C-18, we need an emergency fund for our media. I think it's reasonable. And it's essential to maintain the diversity of information sources in the short term. In the long term, we'll need a lot more, but right now, we can send a clear message that we're ready to act to save our media. Will the minister quickly set up an emergency fund before there's more closures in the news media world? The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question. The Bloc Québécois is among the parties who, unlike the Conservatives, participated in making sure that legislation for news online and for modernizing the Radio Broadcasting Act passed. That's why the CRTC is getting ready to set up a new regulatory framework. Over the next few months and years, a lot of work will be done. One thing is sure is that unlike the Conservatives, we've always been there to support our creators and our artists and will continue to do so.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost. The Liberal-appointed chair of the Green Slush Fund resigned in disgrace after it was revealed that she funneled more than $200,000 of taxpayers' money into her company. An independent report reveals that this just scratches the surface of corruption at the foundation. So how many more Liberal insiders have used the Green Slush Fund to line their pockets?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure that Canadians who are watching this member are wondering what he's saying again, Mr. Speaker. Let me bring facts to the story. Mr. Speaker, from the moment we heard of allegation, we commissioned to have an independent investigation. We froze the fund of the institution, Mr. Speaker. We accepted the resignation of the chair. The CEO has resigned, Mr. Speaker. We're going to go to the bottom of this, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to help the companies in our country, Mr. Speaker.
If I could ask all members to please keep their comments limited to the person who is asking questions or the person who is answering them. The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton, now has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the independent report revealed that multiple board members voted to funnel money from the fund to companies that they had an interest in. This is scandalous. In the face of evidence of self-dealing and corruption, the minister has not seen fit to fire anyone. Why? Which Liberal insiders is he protecting? Why?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And you know what is scandalous, Mr. Speaker? Is these conservatives making claims, Mr. Speaker, making allegations against people, Mr. Speaker. What a responsible government does, Mr. Speaker, is when there's allegation, we investigate. That's exactly what we did, Mr. Speaker. We suspended the financing of the organization. The CEO has resigned. We have accepted the resignation of the chair, Mr. Speaker. We're going to go to the bottom of this, but we're going to continue to help companies in this country. We invest in green technologies, Mr. Speaker.
Encore une fois, j'espère que tous les députés.
Once again, I hope that all members will take the time to listen to the member who asked the question and listen to the answer as well. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of this Liberal government, unfortunately, a personality trait of this government is ethics problems. Recently, there was the $1 billion Green Fund. The Auditor General is investigating $40 million in mismanaged funds. The chair of that organization paid herself $200,000, funneling it to her own company. The Canadians who are listening to us want a clear answer from the government. How and when is this government going to hold these people accountable and pay back the money that these people used to help out their own little Liberal friends? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. As you know, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague for Saint Laurent. He's an honourable man. But today, the people in Saint Laurent must be asking questions because he knows full well what the government is doing. As soon as allegations were made, we demanded an independent verification to get to the bottom of things. We suspended the organization's funds. The CEO of the organization resigned. The chair of the board of directors also resigned. We're going to continue to help Canadian companies while we handle this.
L'honorable député de Madawaska-Restigouche.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it be in the lovely region of Madawaska or Restigouche, which are the most beautiful in the country, the tourism industry continues to draw tourism to every corner of our country. The tourism industry represents an important opportunity for growth. So much so that the World Travel and Tourism Council predicts that tourism's contribution to Canada's GDP could double by 2033. It's a golden opportunity. Can the Minister of Tourism tell us how our government is supporting Canadian tourism to continue to grow and attract more visitors?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Président, mon collègue a raison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is right. Tourism represents 1.9 billion jobs. It's represented in every location throughout the country and generates $266 million a day. Yesterday, we launched the Tourism Growth Program, $108 million. That's going to be delivered through local economic agencies. These investments will support businesses and organizations to help them grow and provide authentic tourism experiences. This is an essential part of our Canadian economy.
The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
This NDP Liberal government spent $54 million on the Arrive Scam app, and now RCMP are investigating contractors. More evidence that after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Now, two senior public servants have accused each other of lying about who made the decision to hire GC Strategies. GC Strategies is a two-man company that does nothing and that subcontracts all the actual work. So will the minister responsible for this decision stand up now and explain to the House why GC Strategies was chosen?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I'm happy to explain to the House is how seriously our government takes allegations of inappropriate behavior with taxpayers' money and contracting or subcontracting. We're obviously very pleased that the committee is looking into this matter. We're pleased that the Auditor General is also seized with this question. And we're also pleased, Mr. Speaker, that the Canadian Border Services Agency, when these issues came to light, took the appropriate action in internal reviews and, as was appropriate, referred any and all of these circumstances to the appropriate authorities.
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
South Korea's ambassador told Windsor officials that the auto giant Stellantis will employ 1,600 workers from South Korea, not Canada, at the $15 billion subsidized battery plant. Every mom on a minimum wage, every couple struggling to pay their mortgage, every union assembly line worker will each pay $1,000 in taxes to subsidize these foreign workers. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister ensure that all jobs at the Stellantis plant go to Canadian paychecks, not foreign workers?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from these conservatives, Mr. Speaker. They have done nothing for the people of Windsor. They have done nothing for the workers, Mr. Speaker. And they have certainly done nothing for the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. One thing that we have done, Mr. Speaker, is to maximize opportunities for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And let me give him some news. The CEO of the company just confirmed that there will be 2,500 Canadian workers at the plant and up to 2,300 to build the plant, Mr. Speaker. This is what I call working for Canadians.
Order.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
This minister should take a lesson from just about anyone willing to give it, and I'll tell you why. The unemployment rate in Windsor is 7%. They're bringing in 1,600 workers from Korea, and this plant is going to cost $1,000 per Canadian family. Every unemployed union worker in Windsor could have this job. Instead, these incompetent, arrogant Liberals give the job to 1,600 Koreans. Will the minister promise right now the jobs will go to hard-working Canadians, not workers from any other country, including Korea?
The Honourable Minister.
I'm sure Canadians are shocked to hear this member again repeating falsehood, Mr. Speaker. Canadians know, Mr. Speaker, not to trust these Conservatives when it comes to jobs, when it comes to growth, when it comes to the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. Let me repeat so he can write down the number. 2,500 jobs at the plant, Mr. Speaker. Up to 2,300 to build the plant, Mr. Speaker. That's what the CEO said. That's what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. We're going to build opportunity for Canadians.
Order. The Honourable Member from Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, this past weekend, leaders, parliamentarians, and senior military personnel from the world's democracies gathered in my hometown of Halifax for the 15th annual Halifax International Security Forum. We came together for meaningful discussions of international security, defense, the role of women in peacekeeping, the threats of climate change, and so much more. Mr. Speaker, could the Minister of National Defence share with this House the important work that was done over the past several days in Halifax?
Great question. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Halifax not only for his great question, but also for his terrific hospitality. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, last weekend we welcomed world leaders and a terrific contingent of Canadian parliamentarians to the largest defence conference of democracies, the Halifax International Security Forum. And Mr. Speaker, this was not only a shining moment for Canada, but it was a great day for the city of Halifax because I had the opportunity to announce $26 million to establish the NATO Defence Innovation Accelerator and, Mr. Speaker, $188 million for a new training centre for CFB Halifax, Canada's largest military base. Mr. Speaker, it was a terrific weekend for Canada's national defence and for the great city of Halifax.
The Honourable Member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, the window to address runaway climate change is rapidly closing, and as the Environment Commissioner clearly laid out, far too many of this Liberal government's climate strategies are falling far short of what is required. Now we learn that the Greener Homes program, the federal fund that allows homeowners to retrofit their homes and install heat pumps, is already running out of money. So will the minister commit to not only renewing this program's funding, but also fixing it so it finally works for low-income homeowners?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, enhancing building efficiency is extremely important in the fight against climate change and in the appropriate utilization of our natural resources. Certainly, we put into place a number of programs, including the oil to heat pump program, but also the Green Buildings program, which actually provides a $5,000 grant to Canadians to improve the energy efficiency of their home. The number one implementation is heat pumps. We sourced money for that program. It has been enormously popular. We will continue to actually receive applications, and of course, we are going to look, as every program, at the results and what we will do to supplement those things on a go-forward basis.
The Honourable Member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's leading humanitarian aid agencies have united together to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. People in Nanaimo, Ladysmith are demanding action from the federal government. all hostages need to be released and a ceasefire declared so that no more children are killed. But this Prime Minister doesn't seem to recognize that the killing of over 13,000 innocent civilians and more than 1.7 million displaced is an atrocity, and it must end now. So I will ask you again, when will the Prime Minister call for a ceasefire?
Hear, hear! Hear, hear! L'honorable ministre des Affaires mondiales.
The Honourable Minister for Global Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we've seen horrific scenes on October 7 when Hamas attacked innocent Israelis. And of course, we also know that Gaza is one of the worst places on earth to live in right now. So we need to make sure that all civilians are protected. We need to make sure as well as humanitarian aid can be sent to Gaza. We are seeing that right now there are negotiations happening between Israel, between Hamas, brokered by Qatar, and we look forward to seeing all hostages released and humanitarian aid allowed to Gaza.
And that unfortunately brings to an end question period for the day. I do see rising on a point of order the member from, from Dufferin-Caledon.
Speaker, in my question today, I asked the minister whether there were going to be 1,600 workers from Korea. On his way into the House of Commons, he was asked that question, and he said, "I'm not surprised there'd be a transfer of knowledge, as no one has done batteries in North America before." So he's admitting there will be those workers, and then accusing me of misinformation. He should withdraw.
Colleagues, I'd like to thank the member from Dufferin-Caledon for raising this point. It has skated, I think, over into the point of debate. I do encourage the member, of course, to pose questions on this at the appropriate time.
As it is 3:20, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion at the second reading stage of Bill C-57. Call on the members.
I invite all members to find their seats. The question is as follows.
Madame Ng, appuyée par
Ms. Ng, seconded by Ms. Ian, moved that Bill C-57, an act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Ukraine, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on International Trade.
The
10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person. All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Ms. Gould.
Mr. Sajjan.
Mr. Sajan.
Mr.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. O'Regan.
Mr. O'Regan.
Monsieur Duclos.
Monsieur Duclos.
Monsieur Rodriguez.
Monsieur Rodriguez.